Então, para dar início aos trabalhos, eu vou chamar ao palco o fundador e executivo da Colaboratório Mutoco. Ele é um conselheiro e investidor de empresas em fase inicial. Ele tem um currículo gigantesco que eu vou resumir aqui. O currículo dele começa com um MBA da Escola de Berlim e vai até um mestrado do MIT. Ele é acusado, ele mesmo aceita essa acusação de viver no futuro, mas hoje ele está aqui com a gente. Antes de chamá-lo, aqueles lembretinhos de sempre, né? Para a gente lembrar de deixar o celular no Vibracol e a gente vai poder enviar perguntas para todos os palestrantes pelo Twitter da conferência. Hashtag CCS12BR. Hashtag CCS12BR. Então agora vamos receber Sean Abrahamson. Would you please?
Good morning. This works. I would try and do this in Portuguese, but my 6-year-old told me that my Portuguese is terrible, so it's not going to happen. Okay, so I think to kick the day off, you're going to hear from a lot of people who are doing some of the most interesting things in crowdsourcing, and I'm going to try and start the conference off by just giving a little bit of context. And so I think the most important point that I want to make is we've been doing crowdsourcing, so I met Marina, I think it was almost 3 years ago, but we've been talking about crowdsourcing as if it's an experiment for a long time. And the thing that drew us to crowdsourcing and co-creation and communities in the first place are some of these examples. The Penguin is a stand-in for open source software, and a lot of those ideas have inspired a lot of the other examples here, from Wikipedia to Craigslist to some of the work that Lego does. Very diverse, very different businesses. But these are the examples typically when you talk about crowdsourcing that someone is going to offer you. What's more interesting, I think particularly in the last 12 months, and as recently as 2 weeks ago, is that I think people have started to realize that these are the sort of small, commonly talked about group of examples that have been around for a decade. But there's now an explosion of newer examples that are usually less than 5 years old that are going to have a tremendous impact. And so about 2 weeks ago, Mary Meeker, who is a partner at probably one of the best venture firms in the world, gave a presentation about essentially reimagining everything. And in that presentation are about 50 examples of before and after scenarios. So a book and a Kindle, purchased music versus rented music. And going through that example of 50, that set of 50 examples, I would say about half fit the description of crowdsourcing in some way. So that's I think crowdsourcing is fundamental to a lot of some of the biggest changes in this industry. And so the way that we think about crowdsourcing, I think there are a lot of different definitions, and we use a pretty broad one. And our way of thinking about this is that this is the reallocation of critical resources for doing business. And usually with people as the brokers, and at very large scale. So what does that mean? On the one end, the easy examples to spot in crowdsourcing are ones where we're talking about labor. We're talking about a different way of accessing people who can do some amount of work. So people talk about mechanical turk, they talk about open innovation. Some of the other examples are a little less clear. So a lot of social media at this point is focused on influence. And so influence is for us very interesting because if I can get enough people to influence other people, I'm essentially doing marketing and communications in a new way. We can talk about capital. So crowdfunding is going to feature very prominently and for good reason. There are a lot of parts of the financial sector that are in the midst of some serious change, and a lot of that is in and around crowdfunding. Assets is at the core of an idea like collaborative consumption. And so this is the idea that we all have things that we can make available to others, but for the first time we have the infrastructure to actually make that viable at a big scale. And then finally, data. Right? So all of our activity as it moves online is generating a massive amount of data. And so some of the most interesting things are using these byproducts to create new ideas. So this is sort of a rough map of these categories of critical resources and some of the words that you may be familiar with. So, you know, co-creation, crowdfunding, big data, those types of concepts. All right, so what's the point of trying to classify all this stuff? So I put up a couple of examples that represent a decade or more of crowdsourcing. So here's, you know, one sort of sad chart. If you were Tally, for example, and you made encyclopedias. And a lot of people have seen this, and sort of the end is kind of sad. Anyone who's in the encyclopedia business went out of business as a result of Wikipedia. It's not news. We forget very easily that Skype is in fact crowdsourced, so the network that you use to do real-time video, and in fact there really are only a few, you know, competitors to this, is built by your peers. It's built by other people. And this trend doesn't seem to be slowing down. Right? This didn't exist. And you know, now I have a competing network that has 35 million people providing infrastructure every day. And this is the infrastructure that led to me, in fact, Utopia was not possible. If Maria and I didn't have Skype, I don't know how the company would work. And it's free. And then lastly, unfortunately, there's no nice chart for this because it's kind of a messy description. But I think the main point about P&G is a fundamental cultural change. So an organization that today gets, by their estimation, 50% of their innovation from outside the company, fundamentally changed in 10 years, in about a decade. Right? From trying to do everything internally and struggling, to getting 50% of innovation from outside and growing. So that's sort of the history. And I hope some of you heard about, hopefully all of those things. And so what I want to talk about is maybe the stuff you haven't heard about, the stuff that's happened over the last few years. Some things are 2 weeks old, some things are 5 years old. But I want to go through some of the class that I think is going to be graduating in the next 5 to 10 years, and the people that are going to transform, I think, pretty much every sector of the economy. All right, so I'm going to try to go quickly because there's about 30 of these. So this time when I came to Sao Paulo, I'm not staying in a hotel. I'm staying in someone's apartment, and I found that apartment through Airbnb. Not sort of the easiest thing to understand if you're in the hotel business, but suddenly anyone who has a room is in the hotel business. It's probably a little scary if you think about it, and you're probably right now calling someone who can change the laws to make this illegal, which is the usual response to something that seems very competitive. Mechanical, sort of one of the first big examples. TaskRabbit is a new example. Instead of people being on the other side of the world that you're not going to meet, these people show up at your house and they do things like assemble furniture, or go pick up food, or pretty much anything you can imagine, as long as it's more or less equal. giffgaff is a surprising idea. They provide really high quality mobile service. And by that I mean not just that the service works, but also that you don't have a frustrating experience when there's a technical problem. So for example, if you add a new device and it stops working, you can expect to get probably the best service. It's good enough that their measure of brand value, or the rate at which people will refer people to the brand, is just behind Apple. And the interesting thing about this company is that their service, their R&D, is run by their customers, to a large extent so in sales. And people earn points around a team of 30 full-time employees. So their customers are providing the best brand experience probably in the mobile world at the moment. And this is just in the UK. So this gets interesting if it shows up in other parts of the world. Crowdfunding, I think I mentioned, we've been talking about that a lot over the next few days. These guys make a really interesting product. I'm hoping to get one. It's a watch that essentially displays data from your cell phone. So if you're really, really lazy and you don't want to take your cell phone out of your pocket, which describes me, you have it on your wrist. What's interesting is when they went out to pitch this idea to Bit, who by and large are very smart, they got turned down. But when they pitched it to about 70,000 people, they said, yes, sign me up. And they raised $10 million in the process. So automotive is not necessarily something you would associate with disruption, although Brazil is a little different because you have the Fiat Mio case. In the US, there's a company called Local Motors, and they've got to the point where the Department of Defense is going to them to come up with, kind of imagine what that might compete with, but new car concepts. The design team doesn't work for Local Motors. In fact, it's people who enjoy tinkering with cars and the end result of things like, these are two of the off-road cars that they've come up with. We'll keep going. So we talked a little bit about big data. Recently there was a US auto insurance company. They took a bunch of data, they posted it to this site. On this site, essentially, people who are very smart about analyzing large sets of data compete with each other to model the data and come up with insights. They discovered that more than one team was actually doing a better job predicting risk than the internal team. Right? Large insurer who manages risk. It's kind of scary if people outside know more about your data than you do. I'm lucky enough to work with these guys in the US. They are, I think, to a large extent transforming how people get access to doctors. And one of the key ways in which that's happening is customers are giving them our doctors. So it's fine to know where someone went to medical school. It's something else entirely if that person makes you wait 2 hours and is unresponsive and unkind and overall sort of a poor provider of service. And so by aggregating feedback about people who see doctors, ZocDoc is actually identifying the very best doctors and also enabling people to avoid the very worst. A little bit more in healthcare, which obviously is a large field, certainly in the US in need of some help. Genomera is an interesting idea in that they are taking research clinical trials. So basically someone has an idea about a diet regimen, a vitamin, pretty much anything you can come up with that might be related to health and wellness. They can create their own test groups, they can run their own trials, and they can use this platform to then validate and publish the results. So this runs alongside sort of the US government FDA-run trial system, and it's growing very quickly. But this is sort of open source healthcare, if you like. Lending Club is an interesting take on crowdfunding. In the middle of this model there's a bank. You go to the bank and you apply for a loan. Might be for anything, a car, might be to pay for credit card debt, might be for a mortgage. They turn around and offer to, at this point, thousands of investors who basically say, I'm prepared to buy $100 of Sean's credit card debt. And so the bank actually has no capital. The bank is just acting as a broker. The capital comes from pretty much anyone who's willing to invest. The bank plays the role of trying to rate and assess the risk. And so here's a bank without any capital. They just change their role to be assessors of risk, and we provide the capital. Lego, my P&G example, has been in the midst of probably a decade-long transformation. Their most recent sort of exercise in crowdsourcing is something called Kusu. I think terrible pronunciation, but if I said that correctly, it would mean wish in Japanese. The core idea is that people not only propose ideas, but very importantly for Lego, people vote on those ideas and tell Lego which ones they should put into production. And for Lego, that's very important, because if you've ever met anyone from Lego, the first thing that you want to do is say, I have an idea. And so if you multiply that across every people they meet, it's kind of frustrating, because everyone has an idea for Lego. So it is kind of nice to have people say, oh, you have an idea, you can test it here and see if anyone else thinks it's any good. So it's a small change, but having a big impact on how they build products. Smart. GE is a small industrial company you may have heard of. Their way of entering at a large scale sustainable energy was to say, we're going to offer $200 million to the very best, wherever you are in the world. We'd like to invest in your company. If you're doing something related to the grid, to reducing demand for energy, come tell us about the idea here, running for imagination. 3 years later, they continue to commit $200 to $250 million every year to different imagination challenges. So, actually one interesting thing, in the first time that they did this, they identified 12 partnerships and potential investments. One of those investments was from a direct competitor, actually being started by a direct competitor. So, interesting times. If you're talking about the creative economy, Ridley Scott is famous for a bunch of science fiction that you may love. Asked people to submit on YouTube a part of their life over a period of a day, and it has created a pretty successful documentary film using that model. We talked a lot about learning. Education, obviously, in an online environment changes dramatically. Here's an example of what happens when you take the campus away and you let anyone teach anything anywhere. This is Skillshare, relatively young platform, but growing pretty quickly. And the principal view of the world is that anyone has something to teach someone else who may be located anyway, and they're trying to make sure that they can connect people anywhere to potential teachers anywhere. Ushahidi, I'm going to keep going by the way, because it's only 30 minutes. Crisis mapping has become a core part of how first responders actually do their jobs. And first responders used to be alone in trying to figure out where exactly are they supposed to respond to, and what are they doing. And now people can sit anywhere in the world if you're concerned, you can play a role in helping first responders. You might be reporting because you're on the scene, you may be able to help organize the data, and Ushahidi is the platform that makes that possible. Unfortunately, every time something bad happens in the world, you'll read about Ushahidi. Unfortunately, they exist because I think it does help significantly based on trying to say. I don't know what time everyone left this morning, so this is about, I think, a half hour ago in Sao Paulo. And so this is possible because you probably have Google Maps on your phone, and because you have Google Maps on your phone, at some point you agree to share data. Some people don't always understand that they've done that, but they have, and the end result is real-time traffic. So I can't argue well enough in Portuguese, but in the US I argue with cab drivers based on this data. It's a lot of fun. HP won an award for customer service similar to GiftGaff, and they did that based on not their internal customer support team, but their customers. Their customers responding to each other and achieving response rates that were better than anyone else in the industry. And so they got an award for customer service. Really, their customers got an award for helping each other, but HP is helping to make that possible. If you are interested in learning a language, I suggest you check these guys out. Duolingo will let you learn a language for free, and their model is very interesting. They'll give you a piece of text to translate. Every time you try to translate it, they'll compare it to everyone else's guess. This was the kind of stuff that your teacher used to throw away, and Duolingo takes that and actually sells it as a translation service. So the back end of all your data experimenting and learning a language turns out to be something they can sell to people who want translation services. From field, for people who enjoy Xbox, PlayStation, more and more game companies are giving people the opportunity to design games with them. This is one thing that's taken it to another level. You can actually pay to join the team that works with developers, and that will give you a say in this case, mostly weapons and whether or not the weapons are fair. There are some other things, but that tends to be most of what's going on. This has existed now for a while, basically accessing assets, in this case a bike, and sharing, getting access to the bike when you need it. This just started in New York, so this summer will be the first time that you can do this. This in a place where capitalism and markets dominate like probably nowhere else in the world, and yet people are going to get around sharing the infrastructure. So I like that, because my assumption about most of the bankers in New York is they will insist on owning their own banks, so we'll see where that goes. So unfortunately, this is the only example in Portuguese, but this is from Technisa, and I think similar to what P&G's experience, Technisa is on a curve to get a lot more ideas from outside. And so I know the business has other growth and other things that they contend with beyond just getting new ideas, but certainly this is a different way for them to grow and innovate. I think in this case, this was an interesting sort of security, safety issue around gas leaks that was solved by the community. So this is an example that's 2 weeks old. It's been live in New York for 2 weeks. The idea here is that there are a lot of people in the US, I think increasingly globally, who are concerned about what we eat, what's in the food that we eat. One of those concerns they think is going to be addressed by people just cooking for each other. So this is not a new idea. People come over to other people's houses a lot. The insight that they've had is that maybe I can't always get to your house, maybe we can't eat at the same time, so maybe I should just enable you to send me food when you've cooked additional food. And so they've set up the infrastructure to deliver food between homes, between people cooking at home. If you're wondering why I pace around a lot, it's because of this. So every day, based on how active I am, goes to these guys. I used to have access to, let's say, a personal trainer, maybe someone at the gym, maybe some people go to see someone about diet, still other people go and see psychologists. I'm one of through, right? So I don't actually ever see these people. They just look at data about me, and periodically I'll get an email to say, you eating badly? Or I'll get a call. Looks like you don't get out much for exercise at the moment, and I have to do something about it. But they fundamentally changed how I access expertise about wellness. This used to be the kind of stuff that was available to professional athletes, and now I can have this too. If you're in the agency business, crowdsourcing is not new. There's more than one platform that's trying to access designers that live outside the agency world, freelancers. This is one example. There are many more. We're going to hear a little bit about IBM today and tomorrow, but IBM has been working out how to benefit from collective knowledge inside large organizations, and often across multiple organizations. This idea is about 10 years old now, which is kind of remarkable, but still widely used. Victors and Spoilers is another agency example. This is a little bit different in that they've combined crowdsourcing ideas with traditional agency structures. This company was 2 years old, and it was just sold to a large holding company called Havas. And so Havas looked at this and said, we need to understand this. This is going to transform how agencies work. Software testing. By their own admission, when they started, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, they didn't know what they were doing, they didn't know how to structure the process. Today, this is a very competitive way to test software. Take a piece of software, figure out the test script, put it out to a crowd of software testers, very competitive economically, and it works very well. If you go to the US retailer like Target today, you'll start to see some unusual products. And the products typically have a picture of their inventor on the back. And this is a company called Quirky. And Quirky is probably the first consumer, I want to say, products, because they do a little bit of electronics, they do things like this power cord, that invites people to propose ideas every week. Everyone else votes on those ideas, and the best ideas Quirky puts into production. Not too different from Lego. But now for the first time we've seen something interesting. It was hard to figure out how successful this model was until these products started getting access to the same distribution as traditionally designed products. And so this is relatively new, and I think it's really had quite a big impact. They've had to bring some of their manufacturing to the US just to respond to recent demand from people like Target. So looks very promising. Another interesting example, and I think this is near the end. Threadless has been around and was on the first slide as an old example. It's more than a decade old. What's new for Threadless is that in the last 2 months, they teamed up with The Gap. And so some of you may be familiar with that. It's a very small retailer in the US. But again, what's interesting about this is Threadless figured out how to get designs crowdsourced very effectively. What they haven't sort of identified or haven't made clear is, what can you do in terms of revenue? How big can that model get? And so I think for the first time we're starting to see, if I take, like Quirky, if I take a crowdsourced design model and plug it into traditional distribution, some interesting things happen. So this has been so far quite successful, although I don't have any data yet. Okay, so that's about 30 examples. A couple of important things. One, we're talking about getting access to resources in a fundamentally different way. So people as brokers to get resources in new ways. That's where the competitiveness comes from, right? If I am paying for bandwidth today and someone shows up and borrows that from someone, I'm in trouble. If I build hotel rooms today and someone shows up and gets access to a free hotel room, more or less free, I'm in trouble. These are critical resources. It's very serious. It is fundamental to competitiveness. And I think that would be not so big a deal if it didn't impact nearly every part of every business function. So you can go through most business functions and I think you can find crowdsourcing somewhere. It certainly doesn't work everywhere, and there are people who are going to tell you about why it doesn't work and where you want to avoid trying to use it. But it certainly shows up in a lot of business functions. And then I think the last thing is just where in the economy is this stuff is showing up. Those 30 examples cover pretty much every sector, maybe with the exception of energy. So I'm waiting for an interesting energy, crowdsourced energy startup. But pretty much everything else, there's some activity, there's some level of activity. It may be a very young company, it may be a company that perhaps didn't solve all of the problems. These are new and sort of difficult things to figure out in a startup. But I think that's reason to give this sort of full attention. I think there's a lot of opportunity. So just as a reminder, I would urge you to think about these things over the next 2 days. As we hear people talking about what they're working on, as you listen to presentations, think about your business in the context of what resource are we talking about? Are we talking about labor? Are we talking about influence? Are we talking about data? Are we talking about capital? And think about what happens if someone else figured out a different way to get access to that, potentially free, at a much lower cost than you do today. And what would that do to your business? And just as a reminder, you're going to hear it sometimes using different words, probably more familiar, but it's a reminder to look out for this stuff and try and think about it in the context of your own work. And with that, I think we'll get on to the next session where more interesting people to hear from. Thank you.